Rage of Mages 2 Necromancer was robbed of worldwide recognition by reviewers who actually haven't played the game. I know, sounds like a conspiracy theory, and let's be fair, it is. But let's just say I have enough reasons to be mighty suspicious. We have already discussed the 1998 Rage of Mages game. It had very positive reception in Russian-speaking countries and Poland, while the global response was mixed. The discrepancy was mainly caused by various cultural differences between Western and post-Soviet regions. The game's flaws were not ignored by either side, it's just that locally those issues wouldn't prevent players from loving the game for what it is, making it popular enough so the developers at Nival could upgrade their workspace from an apartment into an actual office. Every problem I mentioned, things like the exceptional need for grind and a dominant strategy in the form of mercenaries, problems I didn't mention like some magic spells being too powerful in multiplayer, and more have been addressed in the sequel, which was released a year later in April 1999 as Allods II: The Lord of Souls. Locally, it was an even bigger success than the first game. While the scores were fairly similar, the original's ratings in regional magazines were already high anyway, and everyone noted The Lord of Souls' massive amount of improvements. Critics and players alike were showering it with love. Reception of localized European releases throughout May-July of the same year, now under the title Rage of Mages 2 Necromancer, wasn't too shabby either. Like before, Poland took quite a big liking to the game, but also Germany got added to the list of fans. The first Rage of Mages didn't make a big splash at release there, but then it started spreading quite a lot through positive word of mouth, which brought a larger attention to the sequel. The international English version was released in October 1999, and the response was absolutely abysmal. One can say that Rage of Mages 2 Necromancer was saved from total failure only by a few outlets like GameSpot who were partial to the series from the beginning. Now, I don't have anything against a negative consensus. Developers put out a game and critics their assessment. It's a fair exchange. However, it also informs purchase decisions, particularly for games with smaller profiles and marketing budgets. English outlets have always had a very large influence in that regard due to the way related player audiences are spread throughout the world, not only with North America having the most video game players out there in any region that isn't China, but also many countries with populace proficient in English language following English outlets as well. So, as part of the aforementioned exchange, you'd expect the games assessed to get a fair chance. Which I'm really not sure Rage of Mages 2 got. As for the reasons why, if we're to look at it from the perspective of trying to retain faith in humanity, it might be that by the time North American critics saw Rage of Mages 2, they were already distracted by Warcraft 3 announced a month prior. Which nowadays might sound weird. Sure, Warcraft 3 has RPG elements, but it's still predominantly an RTS game. However, on its announcement in September 1999, Warcraft 3 looked like this. Again, without their confirmation, it's impossible to say if Blizzard was in any way influenced or inspired by Nival showing them the Rage of Mages tech demo in 1997. Mind you, as far as I'm concerned, who did it first doesn't matter in the industry. Games are an iterative medium and everyone inspires one another. Warcraft 2 definitely was a big inspiration for Rage of Mages 1, for example. I'm just saying that the increased focus on smaller squads, no base building, going around completing quests, all that definitely feels familiar, and it shouldn't be an absolutely new concept to critics. But if Rage of Mages 2 still had plenty of reviewers questioning whether its RPG-RTS blend can be considered successful, if the RTS part doesn't have base building, while the RPG half doesn't have dialogue choices and so on, everyone embraced Blizzard's mixed genre direction, which based on the description followed a lot of the same or similar principles. The genius move from Blizzard's part was marketing Warcraft 3 as a role-playing strategy rather than calling it a mix of the RPG and RTS genres. Can't have people questioning whether your blend is successful if it's not posed as a blend. Not to mention it pushes a previously established, critically acclaimed 2D franchise into an all-new and shiny 3D space, making it feel more desirable than a game like Rage of Mages 2, which can look quite rudimentary in comparison. It could be that with a new announcement, Rage of Mages 2 just didn't reach the upped standards. But if we're to look at it from that perspective, then it is certainly ironic that by the time Warcraft 3 had its first press showing, Russian-speaking Rage of Mages fans had already been following the development of a 3D game in the series for a year. Nival announced a project codenamed Allods 3D all the way back in 1998 alongside Allods II, and regularly provided updates and information on the project. In fact, the April Russian retail release of Allods II came with a full-fledged trailer for the future game that at the time was named Allods III Resurrection. I have to wonder what would happen if all these screenshots and footage would have been shared globally as well. Obviously, Warcraft 3 would still take the main spotlight, but maybe Rage of Mages 2 wouldn't have been as easily dismissed if there'd be widespread knowledge of something bigger in the works. Or maybe that wouldn't matter at all, because there is another possible explanation regarding what has happened, one in which faith in humanity has been fully lost, and quite honestly, the one I find more likely. That most people who are reviewing Rage of Mages 2 have played it for just a couple levels in the campaign, tried a bit of the multiplayer mode solo, so that in both cases the core seems to be the same as in Rage of Mages 1, plus it looks really similar, and decided to not bother with the rest. One review pretty much admits it. And look, we only have so many hours in our lives. I don't think finishing a game is a mandatory requirement to make a proper assessment of it. At the same time, for most games out there, a couple levels is not enough to actually understand all the positives and negatives. But okay, so one reviewer dropped the game early. That doesn't mean it was something happening en masse, right? Technically, it doesn't. But here's the thing. A lot of reviews were following the same format. First, they'll talk a bit about character generation, then how the gameplay is like an RTS, then a bit about the RPG gameplay loop of going between towns and quest maps, followed by a segment about multiplayer, usually discussing how dull it is, and of course in a game that's designed around interaction between multiple hero units, playing solo is gonna be a bit dull, and then the verdict. And the thing is that this kind of text can be applied to Rage of Mages 1 just as easily as it can to Rage of Mages 2. Their core principles are pretty much the same. The devil lies in the details, and when those reviews go into details, things start feeling really weird. But to understand why, it's best if we first discuss Rage of Mages 2 itself and see all of its changes and additions. It's important to note that Rage of Mages 2 is not a sequel that drastically reimagines what the original game was about. Instead of making several large, sweeping changes, it actually does lots of smaller ones while keeping the same high-level direction. So, when you start the game and see the choice of 4 characters that are combinations of 2 classes and 2 genders, things might feel instantly familiar, but also the effects of this choice would be far more prominent. In Rage of Mages 1, the whole set of starting characters would eventually join your party, and the process was structured as such that their dialogues, personalities, and role in the story were literally interchangeable. In Rage of Mages 2, on the other hand, your character choice affects dialogues with NPCs, the structure of the campaign itself, and viability of various tactics and strategies. Let's take everything in order. Throughout the campaign, you won't see whoever is left out of your initial choice, so only one of these characters will be present as your main one. This has allowed Rage of Mages 2 to give every potential choice their own distinct personality. If we're to summarize them, Elder, the male warrior, is your more traditional gung-ho hero.
Just between you and me, I'm already dying of boredom in this town. Look, it's my duty as a knight to sample as much peril as I can. But Plague, it is so dreary, so monotonous, and so safe. There's nothing for me to do here.
Sagita, the female warrior, is a no-nonsense person who is baffled by everyone's incompetence and stupidity.
Well, the two of you stink at being businessmen. The shop may as well be empty. No mithril crossbows, no adamantine swords. Where's all the good stuff anyway?
The female mage Galenel is sarcastic and self-centered.
I have always been proud of my calmness and discretion, but if these two continue commenting about my looks, they'll pay.
While for the level-headed mage Gildarius, everything boils down to a matter of coins and payment.
I must notice that personal antipathy is not a valid reason for turning down a potentially rewarding business proposal. Would you please specify the exact reward for our assistance, good lady?
You might have noticed, by the way, that the English voice acting is so much better this time around. I still think it's not as strong as the Russian one, so if you'd like in the GOG version, it is still rather straightforward to take the speech RES file from the Russian configuration and then replace the English one after switching languages. But again, the English voices this time around are more than acceptable, and the text translation is actually quite good, properly representing most of the personalities and flavor. It should be noted that in the Russian version, your main hero also has different soundbarks when you command their unit during gameplay, and these lines are connected to their character. But in the English version, it's all standard okay, yes, and whatnot. By the way, if you want to replace those lines with Russian, you should also switch the SFX RES file. It's weird that the command barks are so dry, not only because the English translation actually tried to properly convey the tons of flavor from the original texts, but also added some of its own that didn't exist before. Sometimes it feels weird. Like in the Russian version, your companion Iglis's uncle blames him for being lazy because of going out on what he sees as senseless adventures. In the English version, womanizing is added to the mix. Not only that changes the perception of Iglis's personality, when it comes to intimate relationships between men and women, the world of Allods is romantic and chivalrous. Womanizing is just out of place. But there are cases where I don't mind the extra flavor added to the English version. For example, there is one dialogue line where your character asks if unfriendly means that those who enter don't get out, with a little bit of a different wording depending on your chosen character. The English version had some fun with that line. For every character.
What do you mean, don't welcome? Are they going to gouge our eyes out and break our elbows as soon as we enter?
Judging from your tone of voice, don't welcome means that they'll have our kneecaps split and our bodies burned away. Did I get that right?
Your words and intonation leave no doubt. The one who enters the ancient woods will have his liver removed and his bowels released. Did I phrase that precisely enough?
What's that "don't welcome" supposed to mean? Does it mean that the one who enters gets his nostrils raped and his bottom burned off?
Oh my god! But honestly, I'm fine with those additions. What should be noted is that the choice of character changes up not only how your hero speaks, but also quite a lot of NPC dialogues to be in line with what was said. This really helps with immersion. Then there's the matter of structure. Most main and side missions in the game are the same regardless of which character you choose. But each class has one side quest that's unique to them. Also, each of the 4 characters has 2 different unique missions for the Finding Source of Magic side quest line, and while technically the 3rd map in that chain is the same, the way to solve it is different depending on your character. To be fair, it feels like even more unique missions were planned, and what's in the game is sort of a leftover from a more ambitious concept, but still, what we have now is enough to make the campaigns feel quite different depending on your initial choice. What helps with that feeling is how your class greatly influences your playstyle and available strategies. In the first Rage of Mages, your main team composition would become 3 warriors and 2 mages regardless of which character you choose. In Rage of Mages 2, you're joined by only 2 companions, the warrior Iglas and the mage Dinah. So your core team is either 2 mages and 1 warrior, or 2 warriors and 1 mage, and that drastically changes how you tackle various challenges. The AI of both your units and enemy ones has been improved considerably. It's practically impossible to just break the logic now. If a unit is large, they won't just stand still if they can't reach you, but rather retreat to a safe spot. So if you want to somehow take care of a giant you can't defeat directly yet, you have to choose a different approach, that at least should include some kiting. Enemy ranged and magic users don't just focus on the closest opponent to them. If they see an opportunity, they will try to take care of your support units too. So you have to be smart with your hero placement to mitigate that situation. Pathfinding has been improved for all units, which includes proper processing of dynamic obstacles like the Wall of Fire spells, which AI will try to avoid. You can use that to your advantage to try and delay an enemy force that's pretty large in spaces where you can't create choke points, which by the way is a reasonable strategy on its own in regions full of various obstacles. You don't have to limit yourself only to bridges in that regard. What helps with all these fights is an increased amount of available spell keyboard shortcuts, ability to assign items to shortcuts as well, and a possibility to put any spell on autocast, which can be different for each mage in your squad. There's also various settings in the menu about the automation level of spells cast on your units when out of active combat and what exact factions they will apply to. Speaking of spells, the magic system has been rebalanced. Some spells have been cut out while others nerfed enough to stay effective but not extremely overpowered, and several changed schools. In general, the Astral specialty has become much more useful than it was. And after the fight is complete, while you can still pick up all the loot manually if you want, I do because I find it satisfying, for those who don't, Rage of Mages 2 has added a command which sends your heroes to pick up all the loot sacks within their vicinity automatically. So, just on a basic level, battles with enemies have become much more interesting. However, what really creates engagement is drastically improved mission and quest design. There's so much variety in terms of goals and how you complete them. For example, there is a small side quest where you need to find a band of brigands and take their treasure. If you feel confident and manage to take out the whole band yourself, it's a straightforward enough level. However, if you find the brigands and then run to a guard outpost nearby to take advantage of the diplomacy system where each faction behaves realistically, some knights will go to fight the brigands while others stay at the outpost. And then, after you find the treasure, those who stayed betray you. They were corrupt guards in cahoots with the criminals, which is something you'd know has been rumored around if you visit a village nearby. If you don't tell the knights about the brigands, the traders won't know what's up, so that whole subplot is absolutely missable. As is the whole side quest. It's among those that are activated not from the inn like many main and side missions are, but after finding and interacting with a specific person on a prior map when you explore around. Practically every quest has some interesting unique aspect to it. One mage asks you to get rid of a dragon in her tower, but she's quite suspicious and there's just a lot of beasts and wait, is she healing them? Oh damn, that mage is a servant of the dragon and brings adventurers for food. But not all dragons are pure evil. In another mission there's a couple too full to fight you. In fact, they will help you with lifting a curse to save a nearby village from undead attacks, because its folk graze just the tastiest sheep. The dragons get under your command due to their vested interest. If the ghouls destroy the settlement, then there will be no delicious sheep snack to snag. In one forest, there's lots of wild animals attacking you. However, there is a group of druids that can make sure the animals know you're a friend if you approach them with a mage. In missions, dialogues will often be somewhat different depending on which character initiates the trigger. A lot of times it's for the purposes of flavor and immersion, but there are also maps where it matters for gameplay. In this example, most druids are distrustful of knights and warriors and would not be willing to lend a hand to them. Rage of Mages 2 is packed with memorable setups, goals and ways to achieve them. Helping a Queen Squirrel and her loyal subjects to get rid of ogres blocking their path home, solving riddles to find an artifact, killing fishy imposters before they betray you themselves if you don't realize they're imposters. And the possibility to not trust a task giver is one of my favorite aspects of the game's quest design. Technically, such a move is employed only several times, but that's enough to create a feeling that not only your agency but your attention matters, that the game is not just about thoughtlessly completing tasks laid out before you. Remember I mentioned the dragons who help you out? Yeah, you're actually sent to kill them, and the conversation with them happens if you approach to talk and don't cast a spell at them on sight. The units are not hostile, but since magic is the best way to deal with dragons, it can be just as easy to not notice that since spells work on everyone. The level design also changes its entire approach to exploration-related treasures. There's far less of them now than in Rage of Mages 1, but each treasure you find is much more powerful. Most are rewards for entire side missions, or good chunks of the map with little side activities of their own that you're not obligated to visit as part of the quest you're doing. And this creates a situation where stores become far more useful than in the first game. Purchasing equipment, spells, scrolls, potions doesn't feel like a waste of money because you will actually need them and won't be able to easily upgrade your whole character kits just through exploration, even if exploration does lead to some really powerful items. Besides, there's nothing else to spend money on. Training school has been cut, so you can't upgrade skills for gold. Which is not a problem because the whole leveling up curve is much smoother and you won't feel constantly underleveled. There is 11 mandatory missions in the campaign, the rest 25 are all side objectives. And while the core levels each have significant power differences between them, with 4 or 5 missions available pretty much at any point, there is always something appropriate for your power level. If a mission is too hard, you can try another one to train up your characters. And by the way, maybe it worked this way in Rage of Mages 1 as well, but due to poor balancing it wasn't really noticeable, but in Rage of Mages 2, abilities that are less developed than your core one are trained up at a faster rate, so it's actually quite natural to spread out the skills of your character across 2-3 specialties. Of course, there are still ways to complete difficult missions even without upgrading skills. Smart strategizing is one way, but sometimes you just need a little bit more power, which you can always get if you buy some consumable spell scrolls or useful potions for the most problematic points. Alternatively, you can hire some mercenaries, which have been absolutely revamped as a system. First, they don't take money anymore, but each mercenary is just a single unit. And once you complete a mission with them, they will rest and won't be available for hiring until you complete another. By the way, the dialogues for both hiring and them declining a job are different depending on your main mission progression, which once again helps with the immersion. There's so many dialogues in this game that adapt to the situation, it's pretty impressive. With all that in mind, you have to think of mercenaries as units that cover for your weak spots and use them strategically. And they're not all human either. You can get help from an orc and even a troll. By the way, while the troll is very slow, his huge magic resistance stats make him a very useful addition for missions where you have to face tons of battle mages. And because you can't take mercenaries all the time, and by the end of the game you'll just have 7 available as opposed to the first game's 32, you will never face a situation where your mercenaries do all the work for you. And even if they're with you, there's still enough action for your heroes to keep getting experience points. Rage of Mages 1 was an interesting mix of ideas that didn't quite know how exactly to connect them. It had all the core systems in place, but they were barely held together by duct tape more than anything. In Rage of Mages 2, all the concepts are actually properly fleshed out and realized, turned into fulfilling interconnected systems with solid understanding of how to utilize every element the game has. And I do mean every, not just all the mechanical and mission design related questions we have discussed. even on a very primal level of checking the game's screenshots and footage, Rage of Mages 2 feels more pleasant despite most assets being reused. The main reason is very simple. The brown terrain is not as dominant. Instead, it's used strategically when it feels more appropriate, for pathways, mountainous terrain, or lands defiled by the Necromancers. The latter two are often one and the same, since the Necromancer guild leader Urd, who also happens to be the great mage of the island we're on, is headquartered in the mountains to the north. Wait, did I just mention geography? Yes, this time world building is much more sensible. As fascinating as the lore behind the Allods universe was, in the first game Umwar itself was pretty much just a collection of different places. This game's Yazas, however, is clearly separated into regions, which perhaps is not realistic, but it really helps with making all the different maps you're playing on feel like they're part of a connected landmass. There's a mountain range to the north, huge ancient forest to the west, a desert to the east, and plains in the center. Not only do these region themes define the distinct visual markings of every level, which helps with understanding where in the world they're taking place, but they also have a direct effect on gameplay. Lush, dense forests of the ancient woods greatly limit visibility, while the harsh sands of the Hammer Desert slow everyone down except the creatures native to this type of land. Each region is accompanied by music tracks that are specific to it. For example, if you continue with the woods and desert comparison, the forest soundtrack has an air of mystery to it. But unless you launch it manually in the options menu, you will never hear this track in a location that's under a hot, blazing sun. You might have noticed that the music style has shifted considerably from the one found in the first game. Though Rage of Mages 2 still reuses Rage of Mages 1 tracks for music that's not limited to any particular geographical location. However, some of that game's more questionable tracks were cut entirely, while the ones remaining have actually undergone changes that make them sound better. For example, here's a track from the previous game, and one thing I want you to take note of is how what are supposed to be supporting instruments in the background really overtake the main tune, creating a sort of disjointed feeling. Now, listen to how Rage of Mages 2 fixed this track, with supporting instruments actually remaining supporting and adding texture to the song. Or another example from, once again, the first Rage of Mages, where even though the main melody always remains in focus, various parts of the song still clash with one another. Rage of Mages 2 has done some nice changes to make it sound smoother and more consistent. And I know all these seem like small details, and it's not like they push the game towards an absolutely new level of quality aesthetically speaking, but they really matter for making everything feel more wholesome. Especially considering that besides the distinct visual and musical styles for the regions, there is the narrative wrapper surrounding them. Each area is controlled by one of the 4 main factions of the game. The plains are ruled by the King of Yazas and his knights. Yazas is a vassal state of the Katagan Empire, whom previously would see as enemies because we controlled Kanyans. However, this time our main character is actually from the neutral Umoir. 30 years after the events of the first game, the Great Mage Skrakan sends us to investigate the weird things that seem to have been happening on Yazas. He sensed very powerful magic that's similar in nature to that of the demon. And while we actually haven't seen any Kanyan Allod, it's still nice to get a glimpse of how things look on the other side, which apparently has more Eastern motifs to it. But even before the events of the game, things on Yazas weren't quite as magical as it looks, with the landowning noble families bickering between one another, some caring more about their posh title than the people they're governing. And now the situation is even more complicated, with the Necromancer Guild faction entrenching themselves into the royal court, while also really messing things up for the 2 other groups. The first one is the Druids dwelling in the ancient woods. The relations between them and the knights were never great, which has led to a lot of tension that's at the danger of turning into an all-out war at any second. Which is not great because there already is an open conflict, though at a stalemate, with orcs that have settled in the Hammer Desert. In Rage of Mages 1, orcs were just random groups of enemies that attacked people, but Rage of Mages 2 gives them history and a sense of culture. Before the Cataclysm, orcs were nomadic, but after the lands shattered, they all went through a shock of having to find a place they call home on territories already taken up by people who don't accept them. So while they still remain enemies, they don't feel like random monsters anymore who do evil stuff for shits and giggles. The orcs of Yazas in particular got stuck in the desert and they clearly want to get out of there, but the only territory nearby is that of humans, and they in turn clearly don't want to let orcs in. So, war it is. The story of the game will unravel itself within this complex web of uneasy, tense relationships full of corruption, betrayal, and therefore, naturally, distrust. And there's a bunch of very nice connections between the narrative and gameplay. Map design often tries to tell stories in a subtle way. There is a quest where you have to defend a village from orc attacks. It has the active front layer of arrogant knights not listening to anyone and running off into the desert, when in fact the attack comes from the woods near the village. If after completing the task you decide to do some exploration, you will find a destroyed orcish village that's overrun by monsters. The orcs were attacking because they lost their home. Rage of Mages 2 builds connections between narrative and equipment items too. Half of the game is about finding the 3 fallen stars, which early on we realize are pieces of the king's crown. A crown that the king has asked of the Necromancer so he would be protected from their magic to allow the guild to operate on the island. When you rebuild the crown, it becomes an equipable item with an insane protection from the magic of astral and air, the 2 schools Necromancer enemies use the most in this game. And while it is understandable from the get-go that Urd is going to be our final boss, during our adventures we don't manage to fix the shaky relationships between all the factions. When you go to the final battle with the united army of druids and knights against the necromancers, the first thing that happens is your allies start fighting each other because of old grudges. The units that join you will be from the faction that's left alive. What do you do? Who gets your assistance? Or do you just watch and see who gets out on top? That's up for you to decide based on everything you have gathered about the factions so far. Both are worth fighting for, both are not saints. And what's more, this is far from the first choice you're doing straight in gameplay, as evidenced by other examples I gave throughout this deep dive. Rage of Mages 2 Necromancer is definitely not perfect. There are flaws remaining still. For example, the game is pretty bad at holding unit formation while moving, not all missions are as dynamically scripted as others, so they feel a bit rigid in comparison. As much as AI is improved, sometimes your units still do stupid shit, and as interesting as the world and narrative are, the ending is sort of rushed. While the Necromancer guild is an important player throughout the game, Urd doesn't have enough presence. Not even a dialogue line when you initiate the boss battle with him, and then the consequences of what happens after the fight are just quickly brushed through. Some side plots feel like they deserve more attention, and it certainly seems like there have been some aspects that were cut. For example, based on how the Knight and Druid factions were handled, I swear that the Orcs should have had a similar treatment too. They do get some depth added to them as a culture, but also at some point feel a bit forgotten, despite there actually being non-hostile Orc NPCs and one mercenary. But the thing is, to me, while these all are aspects to improve, the fact that this is the nature of flaws worth noting is also a testament to just how well everything else is made. Look, Rage of Mages 1 is a very important part of my childhood, and I still like it, but I can totally understand if someone gets put off by the game. It's clunky in many regards. Rage of Mages 2 Necromancer, though, having the advantage of being iterated on an already finished game, manages to become not just an improvement over the predecessor in every possible way, but a fantastic title in its own right. With good core gameplay mechanics and great mission design that elevate and promote strategic thinking depending on your playstyle across many creative combat scenarios, all of which is wrapped in an engaging story with solid characters, fun writing, and a world the fabric of which becomes so much richer as you delve deeper into its gradually unraveling lore. I can safely say that if Rage of Mages 2 looks like it's right up your alley, don't hesitate. Just go and buy it on GOG, you will not regret it. But also make sure to check the forums for the fast scrolling issue fix, which is not included in the default package, but it will definitely make your time with the game more enjoyable. I wouldn't say that fast scrolling makes the game unplayable as some GOG user reviews do, but nonetheless it's still best to fix it. I hope now you can see why Rage of Mages 2 was so popular in regions where the first game was widely accepted too. But in addition to single player and every advancement it has introduced, there is also multiplayer. Now, locally, Rage of Mages 1 multiplayer was pretty popular already, but Rage of Mages 2 does some really important improvements that blew the first game out of the water. One is addition of quests to the gameplay loop, which you would be able to get from the inns. The quests aren't anything complex, it's basically fetch or kill, but despite their simplicity they were an important addition that added structure to the experience beyond simply just roaming around to progress. Then, while Rage of Mages 2 has retained its peer-to-peer server hosting functionality, it has added dedicated servers. More than that, Nival has provided the toolsets required for anyone willing to make their own dedicated servers for the game. They would also release a dedicated server patch for the first Rage of Mages, which was nice, but the mechanical updates to Rage of Mages 2 made it more desirable anyway. This has blown up the community big time. Even after Nival closed down its official Rage of Mages 2 dedicated servers, players were still running their own, which has also led to a huge rise in content creation. Rage of Mages 1 did have a downloadable map editor for multiplayer, but its appeal was somewhat limited. But with what was practically global access to the online mode, map creation became very prominent among fans, plus this time the editor was included in the package. The Rage of Mages 2 multiplayer has lived on for a very long time. Actually, why did I say it in past tense? Thanks to the community, it still lives. Obviously, it's not as populated as it was in the years prior, but also at any point in time, even without making arrangements with other people, there's someone playing. Go to Allods2.eu if you're interested to learn more. Their multiplayer client required for server connection is actually free, but it obviously doesn't include the single-player campaign. For that, you have to purchase the game on GOG. So, if one is to look at everything that has been discussed in this video about Rage of Mages 2, and mind you, a bunch of smaller improvements were still left out of the picture because there is only so much I can talk about without overwhelming you all with too much information, and compare it to everything that was said in the previous video about Rage of Mages 1, you've got to admit that even if this isn't your cup of tea, even if you don't like neither the first nor the second game, Necromancer has changed everything to the better, one way or another. And if we were to go back to the topic of international critics obliterating Rage of Mages 2, not only is the discussion of improvements just generally lacking in most negative reviews, some statements just feel plain wrong to anyone who has played the game. And look, we're all human. We sometimes miss or not notice things, or the game we're playing might not explain something in a particularly clear manner. It's fine, it happens. So for example, if a review is gonna say that it's not possible to read signs in Rage of Mages 2, even though it wasn't possible in Rage of Mages 1, whatever, not going to pay much attention to that. But then you might say all towns look exactly the same. Definitely a more egregious case. But to be fair, all towns do share the same basic functions of shops and inns. What and who you find there differs significantly, but if you're just glossing over the game, then yeah, sure, at a glance things might feel exactly the same. But as we go on, we start encountering more things that lack a properly reasonable explanation. Saying that you control a dozen of fighters and mages is fitting for the first game where your core party consists of 5 people, while hiring just a couple mercenary groups will easily get it to 10-15. But as we have discussed, in Rage of Mages 2 you control far smaller squads. Your core team consists of just 3 heroes, and you will be hard-pressed to find enough mercenaries to get you up to 5 or 6, let alone a dozen. And you won't be able to hire them on a regular basis. To get the difference between the army scale of Rage of Mages 1 and 2, you don't have to complete the game. Just make it a bit past the first several levels for the principles to become clear. Then there's reviews from large outlets like IGN that are not just mean-spirited, but in their attempts to showcase that they know what they're talking about, actually reveal just how much they're bullshitting, not only in relation to negative points, but positive ones as well. Let's ignore the ravings which equalize like in Rage of Mages 2 to not getting out much, pit Warcraft 3 developers against this game, and low-key insult people without powerful PCs. There's stuff in this review like complaining that to pick up loot you have to select a single character and manually go around, which as we have already discussed is not a necessity in Rage of Mages 2 with its automatic pickup command. Then the game is berated with a role-playing light moniker because said items you loot have no effect on the character movement rates, when in fact they do. Sometimes comically so when you complete a mission with a lot of enemy soldiers, since human remains still give you exactly what they had equipped. And when a paragraph of praise is mercifully handed out, it somehow manages to lie too. The review explains that the AI works so well because every map is like an open field with any obstacle objects like trees and rocks not blocking units, but rather slowing them down, which is literally not how it works. There is terrain that slows units down, but trees and rocks still have hard and passable collisions. You wouldn't be able to strategically choose choke points or create makeshift ones with spells had they been possible. Needless to say, you'd forgive me for thinking that a person claiming that there's no distinction between magic, range and melee tactics didn't go beyond the first several levels of the game, as it's quite impossible for their proposed best strategy of throwing everyone into melee fights and hoping for the best to be effective beyond those several levels. At the very least because that's when you find flying enemies that force you into diversifying strategies towards magic and ranged ones. That's if you don't go deep into potential strategies and enemy squad compositions. And once again, just sending a large pack of units was a more than viable strategy in Rage of Mages 1 that could make things quite boring, but in the context of the sequel with all its changes, it's not possible, you will die. At least IGN tries to provide arguments for why the game is bad, even if it's pretty easy for anyone who actually played it to counter those points. But when it comes to needless aggression, nobody can compare with PC Gamer UK, which insults the developers for wanting to make a sequel to the game, reminds everyone it's not 1991 anymore and nobody represents cities with something as embarrassing as pre-rendered images, and the game is bad because it's bad. There is no reason to even bother with summarizing why. I wonder if any of those reasons would be related to the game's charming aspects being arbitrarily labeled as ridiculous. I spent a good chunk of my previous video explaining how the squirrel is one of those creatures that adds so much personality to Rage of Mages. You're not obligated to like it, sure, but I would say it's in very poor taste to call the squirrel so stupid and unrealistic to the point that you sarcastically propose some additions to the game's enemy roster that include... What the actual fuck? Look, nobody is obligated to like a game, but I hope you see why I get this feeling that people reviewing Rage of Mages 2 for international outlets didn't play it. Yeah, it's a conspiracy theory, but I just don't get how some of the details in those reviews are supposed to make sense, since to anyone who actually has played Rage of Mages 2, they don't. And the sad thing about all this is that if, let's say, you could call the first Rage of Mages an experiment that wasn't quite successful, you can't apply that to Rage of Mages 2. It's genuinely a really great game, and the community that it has created around itself in regions where it wasn't blatantly ignored is a testament to that. And just like with the first game, it's not like absolutely every international player shunned it, but undeniably the popularity wasn't as big as it could have been if people responsible for influencing tons of purchase decisions would actually give the game a chance. But hey, Allods III was still in development, and the Warcraft 3 announcement has definitely made people more accepting of a game that mixes the RPG and RTS genres together with its RPS moniker, so... third time's the charm, right? We'll find out in another video.